When most folks meet me, they have a habit of assuming that I ride a motorcycle. Furthermore, some people pigeonhole me into a certain brand, and they're not wrong. I'm a Harley man. Each week at RevZilla, I spend my 40 wrenching on their Harleys. From there, I clock out, then I head home and start the process all over again on my own fleet. Because of that, I think I'm reasonably qualified to review a Harley. Now, if you're just here as some internet wag who wants to leave a comment telling people how bad Harley's performance is, let me just head you off at the pass. Yeah, you're not winning any races on a Harley. Their handling and cornering leaves a lot to be desired from time to time, and they're heavier than most seagoing vessels. But none of that actually matters, because Harley sells a snot load of bikes in this country each year. In order to understand why, you really have to look at how the bikes are constructed. Take, for example, this 2017 Harley Road King, packing the new Milwaukee-Eight Engine. This is a motorcyclist's motorcycle. It's got everything you need to take a long ride, none of the stuff you don't. Check out the model-specific windshield on here, kind of the Road King's signature. Folks have been putting these on motorcycles for a pretty long time. Gives you a nice pocket of clean air to ride in, and really makes it a little bit more pleasant to ride in inclement weather. Of course, the saddlebags in the back probably don't even need mention. Ever since the days of horses, people have been throwing stuff over the fender, trying to get out there and take a little bit longer trip and bring some gear with them. So in order to properly evaluate this bike, of course, I need to take it for a nice long ride. So I'm gonna don some gear. While I'm doing that, make sure you click that subscribe button so you can keep up with all the cool video content we're rolling out here at RevZilla.com. Whether it's a bike review like this one, or perhaps one of our parts or gear breakdowns, there's no doubt in my mind that you can find a piece of meaty video content to really sink your teeth into. Let's roll.
Now, you may be tempted to think of the Road King as the cheapskate touring bike, but I think to do so fails to acknowledge the desires of the potential Road King buyer. Remember, this is somebody who wants a classically styled bike and a storied American brand history. I mean, you have to remember, this thing is a rolling fossil. It's the direct descendant of some really important motorcycles. The 65 Electra Glide, the 58 Duo Glide, the 41 FL, and even the 36 overhead valve model, arguably the most important bike that Harley ever produced. Once you understand all that, it becomes pretty easy to figure out what kind of bikes a Road King shopper might be interested in. Now, a lot of the competition for this bike is actually going to come internally from Harley's own line. The Road King buyer is probably looking upmarket at a Street Glide or an Electra Glide, a little bit more nicely appointed with a couple more features. Of course, they may also be examining something downrange in the Softail line, say a Heritage. Those are very similarly styled bikes with slightly different riding missions. Of course, when you think about external competition, one bike springs to mind instantly when you consider, again, that classic style and the awesome brand story, and that's going to be the Indian Springfield. I had a chance to ride on one of those at the press launch this year, and man, that's a dang good motorcycle. Now, at face value, it looks like the Springfield's more expensive than the Road King, but once you option a Road King out to the point where it has all the same stuff as a standard Springfield, you'll see the two are really neck and neck price-wise. Not that it really matters for somebody who's considering a full dresser anyhow. So at that stage, too, we have to consider, again, that brand history. Yes, Indian is America's oldest motorcycle manufacturer, but they are not, however, America's oldest continuously operating motorcycle manufacturer. That award goes to Harley Davidson. Does that actually matter? Maybe to some people. It matters to me. I mean, when you consider that Indian has had more comebacks from the dead than a bad zombie flick, it makes the brand feel a little bit less special. Now, I did promise to show you guys why this is a rider's motorcycle, so let's move on, and I'm going to show you how this thing scampers down the road. You can't talk about a 17 Road King without mentioning the Milwaukee-Eight. Now, I was actually out at the unveiling of this bike. You guys may remember I made a little video on this. We did discuss the engine in great detail. I also wrote a comment tread piece really breaking out some of the nuts and bolts of this, but there are some points I do want to reiterate here without doing a whole rehash. So the first thing is that this is a very familiar engine. It's very similar to the twin cam, but it's just vastly improved. It's kind of funny. It's different and the same all at the same time. It makes more power than the twin cam, no questions asked, and it also makes power in a different spot in the RPM range. This thing makes a lot of power upstairs. It pulls all the way to redline. It's a pretty welcome change from the long stroke Harleys that most of you are accustomed to riding around on. The other thing that's super cool about this thing too is they decided to stuff a counterbalancer into this as well. So this is a much smoother engine. You still got a little bit of that characteristic Harley quake, but you don't get that full-on shake and brake thing that just rattles your fillings loose every time you're riding around on the motorcycle. So from there, I do want to talk about the stoppers on this bike. Now, brakes really are carryover items. For those of you who are unfamiliar with them, what we have here are 3 4-pot Brembos on this bike. Now, if you're coming to Harley Davidson from a sport bike background, the Brembos on this are not exactly the same as the Brembos you're thinking of. These things actually require a pretty fair amount of muscle to get them to work. Now, there's lots of stopping ability here, but you really got to put a boot to the pedal, and you definitely have to have some hand strength up here on the lever. But like I said, there is stopping to be had as long as you're willing to put some muscle into it. I would say that's probably a slight critique of Harley Davidson. I don't know if they always do the best job matching the master cylinder bores to the caliper piston bores. Now, also important with the brakes too, is we have to talk about ABS. So this is something that's important to a lot of people. The ABS option on this bike, $795. Now here's the interesting part. It's actually coupled up with one of the Rushmore updates, which is Reflex linked brakes. Now the Reflex system is actually a linked brake system that has a variable proportion. That means the ECM is using an algorithm to figure out exactly how to split the braking between the front and the rear. I'm going to be perfectly frank, I'm not a fan of linked brakes, and I'm really not a fan of these linked brakes. I would not pop for the $795 ABS option personally were I buying one of these bikes. If you're considering a Road King, you probably have had some experience on a non-ABS bike, and my guess is by choosing this bike, your riding style probably also doesn't demand ABS brakes. It's an option I could kind of do without. Now moving on, the next thing we want to talk about, of course, is steering and suspension. So suspension got changed up a little bit this year. It was pretty good. All new Schott bending valve suspension up front. It's a real improvement. Out back, we've gotten rid of that air over oil setup that we all couldn't stand, and instead now we have normal emulsion shocks back there. And underneath the left bag over here, I've got a preload adjuster. Makes it really simple to adjust your preload. You don't have to go find that special air pump in order to air up your shocks anymore. Big upgrade there as far as I'm concerned. Now when it comes to handling on this bike, you can really dip this thing into a turn. You got that 17-inch wheel you can see up front there. And of course too, these reverse triple trees, kind of a signature of the touring family. And handling on this is pretty good. It dips lightly into turns. Real easy to get this thing moving, simply because we've got a windshield up here. There's not that big heavy fairing with all the stereo and all the other junk that comes along with it. Instead, we've got this really light front end, feels really playful. This bike is easy to throw into a turn. Now, where this whole equation kind of goes sour, though, is the fact that even though it's easy to get it into the turn, you can't go very far. I got 32 degrees of lean angle. I spent my entire life sharpening these floorboards. And if you look underneath there, after I got done sharpening up the floorboards, I got into the mounts. Now, the mounts are rigid mounted to the frame, so what that means is I actually high-centered this bike a couple times. I pulled the rear wheel up off the ground while I was in the middle of a turn. It's kind of a sketchy situation. Now granted, this is a carryover chassis, but Harley really needs to do something about this. You've now got this fresh mill in here encouraging you to go faster and ride hard. However, what you have also is a frame that won't let you do it. That really does need a little bit of work in my estimation. So the question really becomes, does the Road King have a place in modern motorcycling? Let's pull over and I can give you some of my developing thoughts on that.
Now, in spending time astride the Road King, I found out that this bike is exactly what it purports to be. It's a long, heavy machine with plenty of payload capacity and embodies simplicity over just about everything else. Now, we already talked about the fact this isn't a technophile's motorcycle, and that's okay. For as long as there are motorcycles, there will be motorcyclists who want to use their bike to take a trip to the ice cream shop, not take a trip to the moon.
Now before I start telling you what I would change in this bike, let me point out what pieces on here aren't stock. Harley sort of corked the bat a little bit here. They upgraded some pieces on our motorcycle. You'll see that the air cleaner is a Screamin' Eagle piece, as are the mufflers and end caps. They also flashed our ECM. I actually really liked how these pieces performed. But if you're anything like I am, you're going to be buying an OEM Road King. You're not going to have one all doctored up from Harley. So with that said, I'd probably make some similar changes, but I'd use different parts. Out back, for instance, I'd probably use mufflers with a little bit more bark to them. I've been really impressed lately with S&S Mark 45s. They already have 17 fitments out, which I think is pretty nifty. When it came to fueling, I'd probably do that a little bit differently as well. I wouldn't opt for a flash. Instead, I'd probably pick up a fuel tuner. That way I could flash as many times as I wanted to, which I'd need to do when I came to my third modification, which would probably be a cam. At the time of this video production, nothing's available aftermarket yet, but I expect that to change very quickly. My final modification is the seat. This thing is an absolute stinker. I have kind of a love affair going with our house Street Glide. We installed a LaPera Maverick on that years ago, and I'd find a way to either steal that one or maybe just break down and buy my own. Now, in spending several thousand miles on the Road King, I developed quite a few more thoughts than the one you've seen here in this video. So I'd encourage you to go check out my Common Tread article for a little more in-depth analysis. One of the other things I talked about over there too is some of the gossip I'm already hearing about 2018 touring models. I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about that. If you like this video, please give us a subscription. I'm Lemmy, I'm out of here.